May 7th. It started with Mary. She was in her early 40s, a picture of health save for the fine lines that come from time and a life of late nights, judging by the faint smell of coffee that clung to her. Mary was the kind of patient you don't expect to see outside of routine checkups. A former marathon runner, non-smoker, no significant medical history. Her chart was pristine. Yet here she was, nervously scratching her forearm as she sat across from me. "Dr. Walsh, I know how this is going to sound," she began, her voice brittle with embarrassment. "But I think something's living in me. I've heard worse, of course. The body is a mystery to most people, and any unexplained sensation can seem ominous." But Mary didn't radiate the desperation or mania I often associate with hypochondriacs. Her tone was cautious, almost apologetic, as though she'd convinced herself she was being ridiculous. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. She shifted uncomfortably and rolled up the sleeve of her blouse, exposing a forearm lined with faint red scratches. "It's this feeling, like something's moving under my skin, crawling." She grimaced, digging her nails into the spot just below her elbow. "It comes and goes, but it's always in the same place. Last night, I swear I saw something that got my attention." "Saw something?" Mary nodded, her eyes darting nervously to the exam room door. "It was quick like a shadow, but I'm not crazy. It was there, just under the surface." I gave her a reassuring smile and gestured for her arm. "Let's take a look." The skin on her forearm was unremarkable, unbroken save for the faint scratches she'd inflicted herself. No redness or swelling, no signs of infection or rash. I pressed lightly along the area she indicated, searching for any abnormalities. A cyst, a vein bulging just beneath the surface, a hardened mass. "Nothing," I said finally. Her face fell, but I felt it. "I believe you," I assured her, though I didn't entirely. "But it's possible this is a nerve issue. Sometimes damaged nerves can cause phantom sensations. We'll run some tests to rule things out, but I wouldn't worry too much. Stress can do strange things to the body." She seemed unconvinced but nodded. Before she left, she glanced over her shoulder and added, almost as an afterthought, "It's not just me. My neighbor said she's been feeling the same thing lately." May 10th. 3 more patients came in today. They were unconnected, different neighborhoods, different lifestyles. A construction worker with a stiff upper lip, a young woman with tear-streaked cheeks, and a retiree who reminded me of my late father, stoic yet visibly uneasy. All of them described the same thing, crawling sensations beneath the skin. What unnerved me most was the specificity. The sensations were localized, always in the arms or legs, and none of them seemed to have a history of anxiety or somatic symptom disorders. The retiree, Mr. Fennell, insisted he saw something moving under his skin while shaving his arms. He described it as a thin worm, wriggling. I ordered a battery of tests, blood panels, skin biopsies, nerve conduction studies. I even pushed for imaging where I could justify it. Nothing. Every test came back normal. As per protocol, I referred the patients to psychology for further evaluation. I'm not proud to admit that I let the mystery gnaw at me less than I should have. A long shift followed by back-to-back meetings dulled my curiosity. These things often resolve themselves. They just go away. But I couldn't shake Mary's parting comment. "It's not just me." May 14th. It's not just Mary. The cases keep trickling in, slow but steady. A tech in the ER joked that I should change my title from epidemiologist to dermatologist. I laughed along, but it's becoming difficult to ignore the pattern. Patient number 7 was the first to mention the eyes. "I thought it was a trick of the light," she said, her hands trembling as she held up a compact mirror. "But then I saw it again, a little squirming thing, just behind my iris." I examined her carefully, using the slit lamp to magnify her eye. Nothing. Her conjunctiva was clear, her pupils responsive. There were no signs of infection or foreign bodies. "I know it sounds crazy," she whispered as I scribbled notes on her chart, "but it's like they're hiding." May 18th. I can't ignore this anymore. There have been 19 cases in the past 10 days. Patients from all walks of life, all presenting with similar complaints. A few have developed mild rashes or scratches from excessive itching, but there's still no consistent physical evidence of parasites or disease. I've started compiling a spreadsheet. Names, ages, symptoms, occupations, locations. So far, the only common thread is proximity to the city's greenbelt, a sprawling urban park notorious for its swarms of mosquitoes. I submitted a request for environmental sampling, but it'll take weeks for approval. In the meantime, I've reached out to the infectious disease team. They've promised to look into it, though their skepticism was palpable. Still, I can't shake the unease that's been creeping in. Yesterday, Mary returned for a follow-up. Her symptoms hadn't improved. If anything, she seemed more anxious, her movements jittery. She avoided direct eye contact and scratched incessantly at her arm. "I saw it again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's getting bolder. I scheduled another round of tests, but I already knew the outcome. It's nothing. It's always nothing. Then why does it feel like something?" May 20th. Something is changing in the patients. Mary returned today, her 4th visit in 2 weeks. She sat across from me, her foot tapping relentlessly against the linoleum floor. Her voice was distant, almost dreamy, and she kept losing her train of thought mid-sentence. "You ordered, blood tests last time, didn't you?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "They came back normal, Mary. I went over them with you last week," I reminded her gently. She blinked, as if I'd spoken in another language. "Oh, right. I must have forgotten." This wasn't like her. During our earlier encounters, Mary had been sharp, articulate, even when panicked. Now she seemed dulled, like the edges of her personality had been worn down. As I observed her, she scratched absent-mindedly at her arm, her nails leaving faint red trails on her skin. I've started to notice this behavior in others. Patients fiddling with loose threads on their sleeves, eyes darting unfocused around the room. Some paused mid-conversation, staring blankly into space before awkwardly picking up where they left off. It's subtle, but unmistakable. May 22nd. I went back through the charts today, desperate for a unifying clue. At first, nothing stood out beyond the crawling sensations and the vague reports of something moving beneath the skin. But then I noticed a pattern. Every single patient reported insect bites. Mary's first complaint had followed a mosquito bite during a family picnic. Patient 8 recalled being swarmed by tiny gnats on a hike. Another, patient 11, described being bitten by what he called red ants while gardening. They'd all dismissed these incidents at the time. Mosquitoes are a fact of life in the city, especially near the Greenbelt. But the timing was uncanny. Each bite occurred within a week of their first symptoms. I compiled this information and presented it to my lab colleagues. "Parasites?" my friend, Dr. Melissa Grayson, asked, her tone laced with skepticism. She squinted at my notes, tapping her pen against the edge of the table. "There's no physical evidence to support that." "Not yet," I admitted, "but it fits. The itching, the movement under the skin, the memory lapses. It's possible we're dealing with a novel vector." Melissa sighed and leaned back in her chair. "Look, Daniel, I get it. You're thorough. That's why people like working with you. But I've reviewed the same tests you have. There's nothing in their blood, nothing in their scans. Maybe it's psychological. Mass hysteria isn't unheard of." Her words stung more than I cared to admit. 19 unrelated cases, all starting within weeks of each other, all involving insect bites. I pressed. She shrugged. "Coincidence. Or confirmation bias." "Coincidence." The word rang hollow. May 24th. Today, a woman in her 30s, Andrea, described seeing the worms in her reflection. Her voice shook as she recounted the experience. "I was washing my face, and I felt it again like a tickle just under the surface. When I looked in the mirror, I saw them, right here." She dragged a trembling finger across her jawline. "They were squirming, Dr. Walsh. I swear it." Her husband, seated beside her, looked both exasperated and concerned. "We've been to 3 specialists," he said. "They all told her there's nothing there. But she won't stop. It's like she's obsessed." Andrea glared at him, but said nothing. After they left, I found myself lingering in the restroom, staring into the mirror. For the first time, I began to wonder if they might be right. if I'd missed something hidden in plain sight. May 27th. Melissa's dismissal hasn't deterred me. I've started drawing extra blood samples, testing for obscure parasites or anomalies that standard panels might miss. So far, every result has been maddeningly normal. This afternoon, I took a walk through the Greenbelt, the area most patients mention in passing. The park was bustling with joggers, parents pushing strollers, and couples sprawled on blankets under the trees. It wasn't until I reached the denser part of the trail that the unease set in. The hum of insects was louder here, a constant background drone that seemed to vibrate through the air. I swatted absently at a mosquito that landed on my neck, annoyed but unfazed. As I turned a corner, something caught my eye. A cluster of dead gnats caught in a spiderweb, their tiny bodies glistening unnaturally in the dappled sunlight. I don't know why the sight unsettled me so deeply. May 28th. I woke up scratching my forearm. At first, I thought I'd been bitten while I slept. A single, faint red welt marked the area near my elbow. It wasn't painful, just itchy. I applied some ointment and went about my morning. But throughout the day, the sensation persisted. Subtle, almost imperceptible at times, like a faint ripple just beneath the skin. By evening, I couldn't shake the memory of Mary's first visit. I told myself it was nothing. I didn't believe me. May 29th. Melissa called today to apologize. I didn't mean to brush you off, she said. I know how frustrating it is to feel like no one's listening. If you're serious about this, let's run more tests. Expand the scope. Relief flooded through me. Thank you, I said. I'll send you my data. As I hung up, I felt the itch again, this time sharper, almost prickling. I rolled up my sleeve and inspected the spot in the bathroom mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw something. A flicker, like the shadow of a movement beneath the surface. But when I looked closer, there was nothing there. June 2nd. I lost an hour today. It happened during a patient consultation. One moment, I was speaking with a man named Philip, patient 26, about his symptoms. The next, I was standing in the staff break room, holding an empty coffee cup I didn't remember pouring. Philip's chart was still on my desk when I returned, half completed. The clock on my phone confirmed it. An hour had passed since I last remembered sitting at my desk. I scanned the room for clues. Papers misplaced, a chair slightly out of place, but everything seemed normal. I told myself it was stress, long hours, sleepless nights, and the growing pile of unanswered questions were bound to take their toll. But there was a nagging sense of wrongness I couldn't shake. My arm itches constantly now. I started wearing long sleeves to keep from scratching it raw. June 5th. Something is wrong with my reflection. I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror this morning, mid-yawn, and froze. My pupils were dilated so wide that only the thinnest ring of hazel remained around the edges. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the glass. My pupils contracted, then dilated again, almost rhythmically, like the beat of a second, unseen heart. The rest of my face looked off. My skin was pallid, my cheeks slightly sunken, and dark shadows rimmed my eyes. I've always prided myself on maintaining composure under pressure, but in that moment, staring at myself, I felt unmoored. Later, in the hospital corridor, I passed a reflective surface and couldn't bring myself to look. June 7th. The cases are becoming more severe. A man in his late 50s was rushed into the ER this afternoon, screaming that something was eating him alive. His arms were covered in jagged cuts and tears where he'd clawed at himself, exposing raw, bloodied skin. "What's inside me?" he bellowed, thrashing against the restraints the nurses had hurriedly applied. His eyes darted wildly, bloodshot and ringed with exhaustion. The attending physician flagged me down. "This one's yours, Walsh." He mentioned worms. The surgical team prepped him for an exploratory procedure, despite my protest that this was premature. His scans showed nothing unusual, no masses or obstructions. But the team insisted, reasoning that the man's psychological state left little choice. When they made the incision, the truth came crawling out. The first worm wriggled free from a fold of intestinal tissue, its translucent body glistening with blood. Another followed, then another. They were small, no longer than a few centimeters, but their numbers were staggering. Within moments, the surgical tray was piled with writhing parasites, a sickening tangle of segmented bodies. The operating room fell silent save for the patient's ragged breathing and the wet, squelching movements of the worms. One nurse fled the room, retching. The patient survived the procedure, but remains catatonic. The worms, still alive, were preserved for further study. I sent samples to the state lab and alerted the CDC, but I know what will happen. Bureaucracy will swallow the urgency, and the incident will be filed as isolated. June 9th. He's gone. The patient from the surgery disappeared from quarantine last night. The nurses on duty said they checked on him at 11 p.m. and again at 3 a.m. By then, his bed was empty. Security footage showed him calmly walking out of the ward in a hospital gown, barefoot. The most chilling detail? His demeanor was completely vacant. No sign of fear, pain, or urgency. He walked with slow, deliberate steps, his head tilted slightly as though listening to an unseen voice. The footage cut out briefly as he exited the building. By the time the cameras came back online, he was gone. June 11th. I can no longer trust myself. Yesterday, I drove to work and arrived 2 hours late. I don't remember stopping anywhere along the way, but my gas tank was half empty and a coffee cup from a convenience store I never visit was sitting in my passenger seat. My notes are becoming erratic. Half-formed sentences trail off into nonsense. The other day, I found a sketch of a worm, crudely drawn, with jagged edges, tucked into my patient files. I have no memory of drawing it. When I asked Melissa to double-check my findings, she frowned at me. "Daniel, we've already discussed this," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "You don't remember?" I didn't. June 14th. The CDC has issued a preliminary report. Localized outbreak of somatic delusion syndrome. The language is infuriatingly dismissive. No definitive evidence of infectious etiology, the summary reads. The parasites extracted during surgery have yet to be identified, though the lab noted their uncanny resilience to heat and chemical exposure. In the meantime, the cases are spreading. Several patients have gone missing, their families reporting bizarre behavior in the days before their disappearances. One woman described finding her husband standing in their backyard at 2 a.m., his head tilted back, arms outstretched, as insects swarmed around him. He didn't even flinch, she said, not even when they crawled on his face. June 15th. I found a smear of blood on my bathroom mirror this morning. At first, I thought I'd cut myself shaving, but the blood wasn't mine. It smelled wrong, metallic, with a faint ammonia-like tang. I tried to clean it, but the stain wouldn't budge, as though it had seeped into the glass itself. I don't remember how it got there. I don't remember anything at all. June 18th. I found her name buried in a research paper on zoonotic parasites. Dr. Lyra Patel, an entomologist specializing in insect-borne diseases. Her paper detailed a case study on Leucochloridium paradoxum, a parasite that hijacks snail behavior to ensure its survival. The comparison to my patients, puppets to an unseen master, was too striking to ignore. I emailed her immediately, attaching as much of my research as I dared without seeming unhinged. To my surprise, she responded the same day. "Dr. Walsh, your findings are deeply concerning. I'd like to meet. Bring everything." June 19th. Dr. Patel's lab was tucked into the third floor of a nondescript university building. Inside, shelves overflowed with specimens. Beetles, mosquitoes, and other preserved insects glimmered in glass jars. The air buzzed faintly with the hum of machinery. Lyra herself was younger than I expected, her sharp gaze amplified by oversized glasses. She wasted no time on pleasantries, gesturing me toward a desk piled with microscopes and centrifuges. "Show me," she said. I handed her a vial containing one of the worms extracted during the surgery. Lyra examined it through a stereo microscope, her face darkening as she adjusted the focus. "This isn't like anything I've seen," she murmured. "Segmented, yet transparent. And these spines," she trailed off, her voice tinged with unease. "It doesn't belong to any known genus," I said. "Could it be bioengineered?" Her brow furrowed. "Possibly. The resilience you described, surviving high heat and chemical exposure points to something artificially selected. But its behavior suggests a natural evolutionary strategy. Parasites don't need labs to become nightmares, Dr. Walsh. Nature is horrifyingly efficient. She leaned back, pinching the bridge of her nose. These creatures are designed to persist. If they've adapted to humans as hosts, we're in trouble. June 20th, Lyra called me in a panic this morning. I've identified their delivery system, she said. Your insects aren't just biting. They're leaving microscopic larvae behind, embedded in the wound. From there, the larvae enter the bloodstream and migrate to key neural areas, including the brain. That explains the memory lapses and erratic behavior. I sat down hard, clutching the phone tighter. And the infections? They suppress the immune system early on, she explained. That's why no inflammation shows at the bite site. But as they spread, they modify the host's biochemistry. It's subtle, enough to keep the host functional, even as their autonomy erodes. They're essentially hijacking their victims without outright killing them. She paused. Daniel, this might be worse than we thought. I believe the parasites can spread through bodily fluids, saliva, sweat, blood. They don't need insects anymore to jump to new hosts. Your patients may be walking vectors. My stomach turned. I thought of the man who walked out of quarantine, his blood still teeming with parasites, and the nurses who attended to him. And the insects themselves? I asked. They're carriers, likely not the original hosts. Something in their environment, maybe the green belt, exposed them to the parasite. We need samples from that area. June 21st. I finally told Lyra about my symptoms. It happened as we prepared to head to the green belt for field research. My arm had been itching incessantly all morning, and when I rolled up my sleeve to scratch, Lyra caught the movement beneath my skin. What the hell is that? She said, grabbing my wrist. We both stared as something squirmed beneath the surface, a thin, undulating shadow gliding along the length of my forearm. I was bitten weeks ago, I admitted, my voice barely steady. I thought it was just stress at first, but it's spreading. Lyra's expression flickered between horror and determination. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I was afraid. I confessed. If this gets out, I'll be pulled from the investigation. And we're close, Lyra. We can figure this out. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Fine, but you're letting me monitor you. If I see any signs that you're losing control, memory lapses, erratic behavior, you're pulling yourself out. Agreed? I nodded, though we both knew it was an empty promise. June 22nd. We collected our first samples today. Lyra and I spent hours in the greenbelt, capturing insects and swabbing vegetation. She wore thick gloves and a respirator, her movements deliberate and precise. I, on the other hand, found it harder to focus. My arm felt heavier, and the itch had migrated to my neck. You're sweating, Lyra said as we packed up for the day. It's the heat. I lied, though the evening air was cool. She didn't press me, but her concern was obvious. June 23rd. The results from Lyra's lab are damning. Every insect we sampled tested positive for the parasite. Lyra's notes describe a shocking level of infestation. Entire colonies of mosquitoes, gnats, and even ants acting as mobile reservoirs. This isn't just an outbreak, she said grimly. It's an ecosystem shift. The parasites have integrated into the local insect population. They're everywhere. I asked about countermeasures, pesticides, environmental containment, but Lyra shook her head. It's too late for that. These things are too widespread, too resilient. We need to burn half the city to eradicate them. Her words hung in the air like smoke. June 25th. Lyra's monitoring me closely now. Yesterday, she performed a makeshift biopsy on the area near my elbow. The sample revealed what we both feared: larvae clustered in fibrous tissue just beneath the skin. I asked her how far along the infection was. You're still coherent, she said. That's something. But the more they spread, the harder it'll be to fight them off. Once they reach critical mass, she trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. I didn't need her to. June 28th. I don't remember falling asleep. I woke up in the middle of the greenbelt, barefoot, my hospital ID badge hanging lopsided from my neck. My watch said 3:47 a.m. My shoes were gone, my phone missing, and my arms were covered in scratches. The air was alive with the hum of insects. I slapped at my neck reflexively, but felt no bites. Instead, I felt sticky. My fingertips came away smeared with a translucent fluid that smelled faintly of ammonia. I don't know how I got there, but the walk back to my apartment was a blur. June 29th. Lyra called me this morning. "You missed our meeting," she said, her tone sharp with worry. "I've been trying to reach you since yesterday." "I've been unwell," I admitted, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You sound terrible, Daniel. Are you at home? I'll come to you." I almost said yes. I wanted to, but something deep inside me, an instinct, a warning, held me back. "No," I said, my voice cracking. "I need to rest. I'll call you tomorrow." She hesitated, then relented. "Promise me you'll stay inside." I promised. It was a lie. June 30th. I found blood on my sheets this morning. It wasn't much, just a smear near the edge, but it wasn't mine. The smell was unmistakable. That same acrid metallic tang I noticed on the mirror days ago. I've started locking my bedroom door at night, though it makes little difference. July 1st. I can't do this anymore. This morning I stood in front of the mirror and pulled up my sleeve. The movement beneath my skin is no longer subtle. The larvae writhe openly now, their forms casting faint shadows against the pale stretch of my forearm. I tried to cut one out. The blade went deep, deeper than I intended, but the larvae merely shifted, slipping away into the deeper tissues. The pain was excruciating, but I barely noticed. They're inside me. I can feel them in my veins, my muscles, even behind my eyes. July 3rd. It's getting worse. I woke up at 2 a.m., standing in the street outside my apartment. My neighbors were there too, their faces pale and vacant in the glow of a nearby street lamp. No one spoke. We stood in silence, swaying slightly, like reeds caught in an invisible current. The air buzzed with insects, their tiny bodies flickering like static in the dim light. I don't remember going back inside. July 5th. Lyra came to the hospital today. She found me in my office, hunched over my desk. I must have looked awful because her face immediately filled with alarm. "Daniel, you need help," she said. "This is beyond us. You're not safe." "I can't stop," I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. "We're close. We have to finish this." "You're not yourself," she said firmly. "Let me call someone, please." I wanted to agree, but the words wouldn't come. Something inside me resisted, pulling the strings just enough to keep me silent. Lyra left, promising to return with help. July 6th. This will be my final entry. It's 3:14 a.m., and I'm standing in the park. I don't know how I got here, but I'm not alone. There are dozens of us, patients, strangers, people I recognize from passing conversations. We're arranged in a loose circle, our faces turned toward the sky. The moonlight reflects off our eyes, giving them an eerie crimson glow. I see movement beneath their skin, beneath my skin, and realize we are the same now. The insects are everywhere, crawling over our arms and legs, feeding freely. No one flinches. They've taken everything. I tried to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My legs moved forward, drawn to the center of the circle where the swarm is thickest. I don't feel fear anymore. Just quiet. I'm no longer myself. I write this for whoever finds it, if there's anyone left. The final line ends abruptly, the ink smudged as though the pen slipped from Daniel's hand. The page beneath is stained with translucent streaks, their pattern eerily organic, like the trails of a slug. Pressed between the final pages is a single crushed insect. Its abdomen is split open, and tiny worms spill from its body, their forms preserved in dried, sticky fluid. The journal smells faintly of ammonia. Thanks for watching. If you like the story, click like, subscribe to the channel, and write an idea for the next story in the comments.